And so how did you start applying design thinking to the way you were developing your L&D strategy and content, etc.? How were you going about that?
Yeah, I'm at a new organization as of July, and they are really going through a huge evolution, and I think that this has been a great incubator to really
Right.
try things, right? They're hungry for trying new things and new innovations. Previous to this, I think that I've done it in a far more quiet way, right? I think I've been doing this for 8 or 10 years and saying it's, I think, for a long time, and people who know me have heard this. I don't really believe in ADDIE. I believe in ADD-E, like where the E wraps around to the A.
Yeah.
And I think that, I've been doing it for a long time, but in the current state where I am and really driving things strategically, I don't have time to measure things in 9 months. I need to measure things in 5 and 6 week sprints.
Right.
And ADDIE doesn't make that possible. So design thinking methodology and that iterative methodology, and again, starting with that crowdsourcing, like what are the problems that we really need to solve? Is it a learning problem? Is it a communication problem?
Right.
Is it a process problem? Is it a software problem? And being consultative right there at the beginning, I think lends to the space that I'm in. I think the space that we're all trying to solve business problems right now.
Right. And that kind of crowdsourcing part, Sarah, is that having a lot of chats and a lot of coffees with people? Is that sending out survey? How does that actually look?
All of those. So I started with what I call the listening tour. So really going to all of the senior executives, and then starting at the top layer of the organization, and then going to the bottom layer of the organization, and really talking to people everywhere across the organization to see what they needed. So yeah, listening tours, and then listening systems like pulse surveys and exit surveys are extremely important. If your organization's not doing an exit survey, you're really missing out on the most honest feedback you could possibly get, right? And 90-day onboarding surveys are great too, when people are still in the honeymoon period and they give you great feedback and make you feel like you're really knocking it out of the park and what you should keep doing better, right?
Yeah.
So lots of pulse surveys, but I think that, that crowdsourcing piece is also looking at personas, within each different part of your organization where you might be having learning problems, right? And really in that, design thinking model, number one is empathy, right? Number one, empathy.
Right.
So really trying to get to the people, did a great survey. This is, I just brought a group to Savannah a few weeks ago and did a whole learner persona survey and found out that the one role in the organization, everybody had a dog. Nobody knew that, right? But, asked about their family and what their home looks like. And there's one role, everybody had a dog. So, when we created the persona, it wasn't just the persona of the person, it was the persona of the woman and her dog, Biscuit. They named the dog before the person, by the way, too. So
crowdsourcing, I love the idea, by the way, of listening tours. Like, Sarah's on a listening tour, and I amazing. You crowdsource your ideas, you've kind of identified through that process of kind of problems, and let's say business problems for the time being. What happens with that information afterwards?
Yeah, that's great. So I go through a process that, often we do like a rosebud thorn exercise, right? So like, what are we doing well? Where do we have to improve, and what should we basically scrap, right? Or what's getting in our way of getting to the good and the opportunity. And that process within a group, I think, is really effective to then say, okay, well, this is really not a learning problem, right? Like, this is an opportunity to grow the organization, but really fundamentally, it's a leadership problem.
Right.
And then say, okay, well, it sounds like this is a communication problem between this group and this group.
Right.
So when we get down to it, we're like, okay, we've boiled this all down and looked at this as a process and say, okay, well, these are the learning choices we need to make to
Right.
create opportunity for the organization. So I think that, again, in that design thinking model, we have a very unique way of being able to say, okay, we understand what's going on organizationally, and we see the business problems that we keep encountering. And it's really easy for a lot of people to say, oh, it's a learning problem. Like we hear that.
Yeah.
Right. Like, oh, train people on this, right? Yeah. And that will like I have some magic wand, you know, oh, we've solved the learning problem, right? No, that's not how it works. So, you know, I think that there are lots of different processes and methodologies that align with, you know, design thinking. There's a great program at Luma Institute where they, you know, have like a card, brought my cards for the YouTube viewers here. But, you know, it's called Innovating for People, but it's a card sort where you can be like, okay, let's try this exercise and this exercise and this exercise. And if we put these things together, then we'll probably get to a point where we understand where we need to go.
And who's involved in that discussion, Sarah? Like, who else do you bring in when you're discussing, is this a leadership problem, communication problem, learning problem? Who's involved in that?
That's a great question, Nelson. I mean, as many people as I can get involved, frankly, right? So stakeholders are important, whether they're part of that broader conversation or in that listening phase. The director, VP director level, the people who are, you know, strategically moving the needle in the organization are important to get involved in that conversation because they have, frankly, different things that they're aiming for, right, than maybe the learners themselves. Bringing the learner into the conversation, if nothing else, through, you know, modeling and creating personas, bringing them into that conversation so you can point to the persona on the wall and say, well, how would Natalie solve this problem? Yeah. But it's also bringing in your learning consultants, right? I think that we, as learning consultants, have a really important role within organizations to help solve business problems.
Yeah. And what does the format of one of those sessions look like, Sarah? Is it like you're up on the whiteboard, sticking Post-its and getting everyone involved? Or is it kind of presenting back the data you've gathered from the crowdsourcing? What does it typically look like?
It can be both. I mean, I've gone through and walked, you know, I do a number of consulting work, and I've gone through virtually this process too with something like a Miro board or a Tableau board, where you're asking questions, trying to get as much information from the people in the room and the subject matter experts. And then, presenting out sometimes the data that might surprise them, right? The pre-work of those sessions,
right?
Which is always it's usually rather enlightening to present back people, you know, the people that they work with every day in an anonymized way, giving their feedback.